right. Hopefully you got some good gratitudes down. Marissa, thank you for throwing one in the chat box. I always appreciate it when people will throw in there either a gratitude or either a win or a victory even. I love it when people will share those. So uh, love to see you throw that in there, either something you're grateful for or a win or a victory or something that you have had. Okay. Well, hey, here's what I wanted to talk about today is I wanted to start by asking you a question. What are your standards? What are the standards that you have defined for yourself? Have you defined standards for yourself? Have you put some things in place that you have identified as standards? And so I want to talk with you just a little bit about that today and how and why having standards and things are important to us. And so I'm going to do a share of my screen here with my iPad to write a couple of things here to show you what I wanted to show you today. So when we talk about standards, think about it this way. Standards are the fabric in your life that weaves to create basically your life. So think of it that way, as think of it as a fabric that's weaved together. And you have all these standards that are weaved together that create basically who you are, and what you get out of your life is based upon these standards. Well, I wanted to show you basically what happens with standards. Is it looks something like this. Is we have standards in place and we have things that we will, I like to refer to this as like drawing a line in the sand. We will draw a line in the sand of saying, I won't go past this. Well, that's going to be a standard by saying, this is where I am. This is what I will not go beyond. Well, so if you think about it, is what happens is this. In our life, we have certain standards that we have put in place. And another way of saying that would be this, is we have expectations. So you've got expectations in your life, and those are going to be the standards that you have. Well, whenever we have stress in our life, stress comes from acting inconsistent with a principle that governs an outcome. So let me say that again. Stress comes from acting inconsistent with a principle that governs an outcome. And so whenever you have stress in your life, it is going to be typically tied to some type of a principle, or let's say it another way, it's tied to some expectation that you have. And where that stress comes from is we have these expectations, and then down here, we have what we would call our acceptations, or what we accept. So we have the things that we expect, or things that we would define as our standards that we would expect to take place. Well, we have these standards of things we expect to have happen, but then down here we have the things that we accept in our life. So we have these standards that we put in place of I expect my kid to clean the room, but then when he doesn't, and I accept that, and so I'm accepting something lower than what my standard is, what happens then is this area in here between what our expectations are and what our acceptations are equals stress. So stress comes because we have these expectations, but we're not meeting those expectations. Same thing within our relationships. You expect certain things of your significant other or your spouse, but then you accept something less than that. The difference between the two is where stress is created. Stress comes out of having a higher expectation than what we are willing to accept. So how do we get rid of the stress? Well, the way that we get rid of the stress is we either have to lower the expectation or we have to raise the acceptation. We have to not be willing to accept it. The beautiful thing about this universe that we live in is that it is based upon principles, and that when you act consistent with a principle in the universe, you are going to get an outcome. That is the beautiful thing about it. Whenever we act inconsistent with it, we're going to get a negative outcome, which is where this stress and things come from. Okay, so now with that in place, let me get rid of my share screen here. Here's what I want to talk to you today about is, what are your standards? What are the things that you have set as a standard for yourself in this business? And I'm going to give you some ideas of 5 things that I think that if you would have these be your standard, you will be successful in the business. And whenever you do less than that is where then stress is going to come from. So here's the 5 things that I wanted to share with you guys today about how to be successful in this business. So the very first one, which probably won't surprise you, probably none of these 5 are really going to surprise you, but here's where I would start with, is number 1, standard that I believe you should have for yourself is to set an appointment every day. You need to be thinking about that every single day. In fact, at one point in my career, I had created, and it wasn't very pretty, but I had created a paper that I had posted up that said, your mission, 1 appointment a day. Essentially, that's what my mission every single day was. I stripped everything else out of the way and just said, no matter what happens today, I will set an appointment. And if you will do that, it is amazing how things will change for you. Now, again, remember where the stress comes from. We put an expectation that I'm going to set an appointment every day, but if we accept ourselves not doing it, is going to create stress because we're accepting less than we expect of ourselves. So the first thing I would highly recommend for you guys of these 5 things that you need to do is number 1, set an appointment and have the expectation of yourself and don't accept anything less than setting an appointment. Now, for me, when I did that, it totally changed everything for me, because what happened then is in the morning, I was like, okay, if I can't go home, and that's the way that I always did it, is just said, I can't go home until I set an appointment. Well, if that's true, if I can't go home until I set an appointment, then what my question for you is, what would you do differently? What would you do differently in your business if you told yourself today, I will not go home until I set an appointment? What would change? How would you approach things differently? Well, for me, let me tell you what I did. For me, in terms of that, number 1, I started earlier in the day. And number 2, I changed the way that I approached people. I wasn't willing to just accept the fact that somebody talked to me and I could put a tick mark and count it as, hey, I got a contact in today. That wasn't good enough anymore. Instead, it was, hey, I am going to do this until I set an appointment. So that's number 1, set an appointment every single day. Number 2, now this one is going to vary depending on who you are and where you're at in your business. But here's what I would tell you. Is you should be taking a listing, depending again where you're at in your business. If you're brand new, your objective is I need to get 1 a month then. If you are a brand new agent, if you are doing less than 20 deals a year, I would say you should be having the objective of I got to get a minimum of 1 listing a month. Now, you guys that are doing more business, and probably I should say 10 or less. If you're doing 10 or less, you need to get 1 listing a month. From 10 to 20, you should be saying, I need 2 listings every month. So I'm asking you, what is your standard in terms of taking listings? Right now in the market, we need more listings. What could you do to go out and get more listings? Well, let me give you one idea that I think you should be looking at. Right now, there are tons and tons of buyers who can't find a property. And in fact, I saw on a social media group that I'm a part of that an agent posted that they had gotten 98 offers on a listing this last week. 98 offers on their listing. That tells you we are in dire need of listings. So what can you do to do that? Well, if you've got buyers that you're working with, one of the things that I would recommend that you do is go get on the internet, or excuse me, the MLS, do a search for the last up to 5 years even of properties that expired that would meet what your buyer is looking for. So go and look for the last 5 years, any property that expired that did not go back on the market that would match the criteria for what your client is looking for, and then go knock on the door. When you go knock on the door, if they're not home, go knock on their next door neighbor's door and find out when you could get a hold of those people. Find out if they know if they would still be interested in selling. Find out why they had their home on the market to begin with. But go and take some listings. Now, for some of you, you should be taking a listing every single week. You should have that be a standard for you, is that I am going to take a listing every single week. and don't accept less than that. See, that's the key on this. So number one, set an appointment. Number two, take a listing for, and again, depending on where you're at in your career, whether it's one a month, but that should be the very minimum standard that we should have, is at minimum, I need to get one listing every single month. Some of you should be 2 a month. Others should be doing it every week. And potentially some of you that are on here maybe ought to be looking at it of, I need 2 a week or 3 listings every single week. But what's your standard? Decide what your standard is going to be and decide that I'm not going to accept less than that standard. All right, number 3 thing that you should have as a standard is call between 3 and 5 of your SOI every single day. The NAR does a study every single year, and every single year it is somewhere in the 66 plus or minus % of the listings that are taken come as a result of the person choosing the agent because they were a friend, neighbor, or a relative, or they were referred by a friend, neighbor, or relative. So if you're not working your SOI, in fact, actually, let me give a plug for this one. And I didn't intend to do this, but today at 10 o'clock Utah, 9 o'clock California time, I am going to be teaching an SOI class. And here's what I will tell you. The process that I teach on your SOI, I don't care if you don't have anybody in your SOI. If you're like, I just moved here, I don't have anybody in the SOI, I'm going to teach you how to do it. I'm going to give you a process. I give you 4 protocols, and I'm going to be teaching this today in just a couple of hours, hour and a half, I guess. I'm going to be teaching 4 protocols that if you will do it, it will work. And it's not very difficult. So if you can, jump on and attend that class today. It's 10 o'clock Mountain Time, 9 Pacific. But you should be calling 3 to 5 people from your SOI. How much more business would you do if you did that? See, the way that 66% or 2/3 of the time, the way a seller is going to choose the person they list it with is because of they are either a friend, neighbor, or relative, or they were referred by a friend, neighbor, or relative to the agent. That is the way you need to build your business, is by building and continually working on your SOI. So what's your standard? What is your standard in number of people you will call every single day from your SOI? And here's what I'm telling you. If you will commit to this and don't accept less than it, you're going to find less stress in your life, less stress in your business. You're going to be able to do way more in your life than what you can do without contacting your SOI. So how much more business would you do if you actually did that? And I get it that you're afraid to contact them. I'm going to deal with that today in the class. How do you deal with it when you're afraid to call these people because you don't want to bug them? Well, I'm going to talk to you about that today as well. So sorry to throw in a commercial for the class I'm doing a little bit later, but I would highly recommend you get on that. If you are not generating the income you want, it's probably because you're not working your sphere of influence. So call 3 to 5 a day should be your minimum standard. All right, next, number 4 on terms of standards. You need to be calling your sellers every single week. And maybe I should just say it as clients. Updating your clients at least once a week, be talking to them. I remember as a new agent, I had gone out on one of the first for sale by owner appointments that I had gone on. And I remember I came back to the office and there were a few agents standing around and they asked me, hey, so how'd that appointment go? And I said, well, it went okay, but man, they were up in the night on their price. Now, I was fairly new, so I didn't really know about using a pricing strategy and a lot of the things I know now. But I remembered saying to these agents, they were up in the night on their price and they were not willing to budge off of what they were going to list the home for. So I just left and didn't do it. And I remember an agent that was standing there at the office at the time said, are you kidding me? Give me their number. I'm going out there and I'll go list it. I don't care what the list price is. Now, what I learned later about this agent was he would list it at any price and then he would never call the seller again. When he would take a listing, he would go plop his sign in the yard. And then if it sold, he would contact the seller again. If it didn't, oh, well, he didn't care. We don't want to be that way. So remember, I said, most of the time, 2/3 of the time, the way you're going to get listings is because of a friend, neighbor, or relative, or a referral from them. Well, if you want to get referrals, you've got to be contacting your seller every week. So make that a standard in your business that I will call every single week my clients to update them as to what's going on. Now, the fear on that is when we take an overpriced listing, we take it and we worry, well, I don't want to call them and tell them nothing's happened because then they're going to be upset at me. Well, that's just a sign we needed to do better on the pricing strategy to begin with. But so your number 4 standard that you should have in place is that I'm going to call my sellers or buyers every single week. And then number 5, the number 5 thing that I would recommend for you to have as a standard is to participate. Now, I know I'm preaching to the choir. It's like I'm at church and I stood up and I turned around to the choir and said, you guys should show up and sing in the choir. I know that's what I'm doing, but here's what I have seen. In the 5 years, I guess 5.5 years now that I have been with Everest, I have watched how agents will come and they will participate in this morning meeting. And then after a while, they start to go, oh yeah, no, I've heard all that. I don't need it again. See, what I have found is that when that happens, typically what also goes along with not participating is that we forget and we start to round corners. See, the universe that we live in, stop and think about this for a minute. Square corners do not exist in nature, meaning that there's a principle called entropy, which is basically that things are winding down. Things are going from order to chaos. Our lives are winding down for us. We consistently are seeing things get off track. Over time, everything will get off track. Well, the reason for that is this principle called entropy. Is what happens is we start to round the corners and we think, well, I don't need that anymore. Even though that may have been what helped contribute to the success of your business, is don't do that. The only thing that stops that from happening, you stop and look at the square corners that are out there in the universe are typically created by humans. We are the ones who go out and create it because nature tends to round the corners. If you were to go build a building out in the middle of nowhere and just leave it and never go there again, do nothing to it, over time, what's going to happen? It's going to end up becoming dust, basically. It's going to rust. That's entropy. Entropy is life going from order to chaos. Without standards that we put in place, without you saying, here's what I'm going to do in my business. I'm going to set an appointment every day. I'm going to take a listing every week. I'm going to call 3 to 5 people in my SOI. I'll call my sellers every week, and I'm going to continue to participate in the things that Everest is doing. As you participate in that, it will help keep you focused. Even if you only get one little thing, one little nugget out of what we've talked about today, it was worth your time getting on and participating. So keep participating. Don't quit in the participation. Typically, agents quit, the business starts to decline. Then next thing you know, they're out looking for a different job. Don't let that be you. There are people that I see on here today that as I'm looking at the list here of those who are on, that are on here pretty much every single day. And I got to give a shout out to April Oakes, because April is one that for the time that I have been here, she is probably one of the most consistent, along with Brenda Lee Jones. Like those two are people that I see consistently here. And I shouldn't have started throwing out names because then I see Greg Haddock and I'm like, oh yeah, Greg's here. And I see Liz and oh, Rick is standing in here going, what about me? Yeah. Rick's probably the most consistent person since I've been here. All right. Well, hey, hopefully that gives you some ideas. So what are you going to change? What are you going to set as your standards within your business? I'd love for you to put it in to the chat box. What are going to be the standards that you're going to hold yourself to that no matter what, you are going to keep them going? Okay. Hey, even if you don't put it in the chat box, decide today, which of those 5 things do you need to do a little bit better on, and implement that and see what happens. All right, let's wrap it up with our closing affirmations, but thanks for being with me, guys. If you get a chance, I'd love to see you on that SOI class today. If not, then maybe next time. All right, here we